Hello, and welcome to this session, Mitigating Risks of Massive Regulation Changes, a practical look at EU MDR packaging implications. I'm Lisa Pierce, Executive Editor of Packaging Digest, and I have the pleasure today of talking with Abhishek Gottman, Director of Global Packaging for Teleflex. Teleflex is a medical device manufacturer that operates in 40 countries and produces a diverse portfolio of specialty medical devices for a range of procedures in critical care and surgery. Abby has been with Teleflex since 2019 after nearly 20 years of experience with other major medical companies such as J&J, Edwards Life Sciences, ConMed, and Medtronic. His LinkedIn profile describes him as a, quote, industry speaker and influencer for over a decade who loves moving complex, mountainous problems to simple solutions, unquote. And that's what he's going to share with us today. Some simple solutions to the mountainous problem many medical device manufacturers are facing right now because of the European Union's medical device regulation, which impacts the packaging of medical devices marketed in the EU. Abby, thanks for talking with us today and welcome.
Thank you, Lisa. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Our pleasure. So, Abby, give us a rundown, please, of the current situation for packaging departments at medical device companies because of the May 2024 compliance deadline for the European Union's medical device regulation. What are they dealing with right now?
Absolutely. So before we jump into the discussion, to set just the foundational thinking and looking at the timeline, I want to share a quick visual. This image that you're looking at is directly sourced from the European Union website, which provides you with an overall timeline for the EU MDR. And looking at this, really how this translates is we all know that May 26, 2017, MDR entered into force. Starting 26 May 2020, MDR fully applied, so we are in that period. From May 2020 to 2024, the MDD certificates before MDR fully apply are valid for 4 years. And all devices placed in market as of May 2024 must be compliant with MDR. So starting 26 May 2024, any MDM that releases products into market selling in the European Union have to be in compliance with MDR. And there's some flexibility where they're saying, okay, May 2024 to May 2025, if you placed any MDD devices, they may continue to be available, right? Now, sure, there's all these timelines, but what does this mean, right? MDR is in full force. There's a lot of activity going on in medical device manufacturers scrambling to figure out how to meet the compliance. And it might be easier for new products, right? But when you think about the legacy products, and you think about the major medical device companies, there's big portfolios we're talking about. So when you look at packaging engineering, right? I think an interesting part about packaging engineering is that in most cases, we are shared function across multiple different business units between R&D and operations. There's always a lot going on. So when you think about obstacles or challenges that the packaging engineers are facing, there are a few many, but there's some very obvious ones that I wanted to share with you today to answer your question. The first one is an obvious one, right? So you look at EUMDR. How do you translate into actionable items that are going to allow you to meet the MDR compliance, right? So the very basic foundational element. MDD versus MDR. So we saw in the timeline, there is some flexibility, there are some options. Depending on the company you're working for, depending on the strategy they have, they may approach you for an MDD recertification versus MDR. And you're torn between these two regulations because the expectation is MDR is in force right now, and you have to comply. Procedural compliance, that's another interesting one. So depending on the company you work for, and the architecture of your quality systems, you may have procedures that are higher level, company level, that you have to comply with. And if the procedures don't meet the intent of EU MDR, you're walking an edgy slope, and you're walking a line that is probably not in compliance. Versus you could have be in a company where you have a packaging level quality system, right? So you want to make sure that your procedures are already meeting the intent of EU MDR, so the work you're doing for new products is going to comply with EU MDR. Consistent process to compliance. We'll take a quick look at it later. Essentially, in this case, what we're talking about is planning, right? So you've got the EU MDR. Well, how do you go about it, right? How do you bring yourself in compliance? So having a consistent process, having a sound thinking is very important in this case. State of legacy products. So this one is a very interesting, a very challenging one. So if you think about MDD, if you think about even previous versions of ISO 11607, right? If you're talking about products that have been out for, let's say, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, products have been around for a while, there's a chance that they don't meet even the standards that were there before the EU MDR was introduced. And so you're already challenged, right? And now you got EU MDR. So how do you address that, right? Risk of retesting, that's another one. So you've got these legacy products, they don't meet the standards, they don't meet EU MDR. You have to fill the gap. Do you just go retest, right? And there's a risk because you're testing that something like one. Current priorities versus resourcing. I think we all know about this. I think packaging is probably not the only function talking about this, but you got your day-to-day operations, you got your new product introductions, you got fires to fight, you've got all this work that's going on, and you're putting that against the resourcing, the focus that the EU MDR require. So I will say we're in a very exceptional spot, both from what we're faced with because of the EU MDR. We're also in a very special spot because we're a shared resource. So just a few items I want to list out for you to get us started.
Well, packaging departments do need a plan for tackling the complexities of managing such a massive regulation change. Abby, how should they start and why there?
Sure. So for us to jump in to start talking about a plan, I thought it was important, Lisa, to just list out in a very concise manner, some verbiage from EU MDR, right? And I will say this is not all inclusive. If you look at the EU MDR documentation, there's a long list of things that have to be met. But when you look at the industry and look at what everybody is doing, I mean, these are few experts that are copied from the EU MDR. But when you look at this, right, and you translate it, right, you say, okay, Abhishek, this is great. We're talking about these requirements. How do you translate it, right? Like you coming into a regulated packaging environment, how do you translate? Where are you going to go with this? So one of the first things I want to emphasize, and this is extremely important, is we as a medical device packaging community have to remember that ISO 11607 part 1 and part 2 compliance is an absolute. It's a standard expectation. That expectation hasn't changed as part of the EU MDR. So you still have to comply with the ISO 11607, right? That's one. But when you look at the EU MDR and you start to translate, and there's many ways to do it, I sort of just summarize in very few bullet points. So for me, when I look at the EU MDR emphasis, is very patient focused. You can tell, and they have increased emphasis on improved overall handling and storage. There is reduced risk of contamination is an emphasis. Evidence, clear evidence, better evidence of integrity, aseptic presentation of the devices, and usability evaluation. So this is a rather simple high-level translation of where the focus is for the EU MDR. And that's just the starting point, right? So the question to what you were asking is, where do you go from here, right? How do you plan this activity? And I would say there are several ways to do it. There's many ways to do it. For me, I'm a simplistic guy. You said it early on. for me, simple thinking is important. So from my point of view, we can really divide this into a 4-step process, right? Plan, do, check, act is a very common one that is used in the industry. So for me, let's start with the planning aspect. So like we were saying, the first thing you have to do is make sure that your knowledge base is really all encompassing on what the EU MDR requirements are and what ISO 11607 Part 1 and Part 2. So you should have a very clear understanding, whether it's through your procedures, whether it's through your processes, you should have a grasp of what is being asked for, right? That's just the starting point. Now you need to turn this into an actionable, some kind of actionable list, right? So what you do from here is you create a gap assessment checklist. Based on the requirements, you develop an essential requirement checklist to perform a gap assessment based on the standards. From there, it starts to become obvious. So where are we going with this? We're going to go ahead now, pick up our legacy products, review designs, review processes, review testing, everything that we have on file against the essential requirement checklist. And that's what's going to start telling you the story. Okay, what types of gaps are you seeing? How big they are, how small they are, what type of risk are you going to see, right? And that is what's going to allow you to walk into the final step where you're going to start to look at closing the gaps, right? And that's where a lot of your activities will have to be very strategic. They'll have to be very cognizant of the risks that you're seeing. And you have to really comprehend, are you going to retest, right? Are you going to simply pick up a legacy product, test it, retest it, close a compliance gap? Are you going to develop a rationale? Are you trying to do something else? So this is a very high level 4-step process that can further be broken down into sub-processes. But to me, this is a starting point because my experience in a complex situation with EUMDR is that if you don't plan properly, you cannot execute properly.
Well said, well said. I agree wholeheartedly. Some people say, though, that this is maybe a great opportunity for designers and developers to optimize the packaging, maybe across brands or across product lines, across different manufacturing locations. What are your thoughts on that, Abby? And what might be some of the trade-offs?
Thank you, Lisa. So you're right. EU MDR compliance, right? Is it a challenge or an opportunity? And I'll openly and honestly share with you, several years ago, when I first time heard about EU MDR, I was very stressed out. I looked at it as a challenge because of everything that I just mentioned, right? Around packaging, engineers facing obstacles. So whether it was me or my organization or the function of the company, I looked at it as a daunting task, right? But as I started out on that journey and created project plans and started working on, I recognized that this was actually a great opportunity for MDMs to really create some very exclusive trade-offs that exist and that can really improve your products, improve the opportunity that you have. So to me, it's rather simple again. So let's look at this quick visual, right? So um, companies do cost benefits analysis all the time, right? So let's talk about that real quick. Very simple, high level cost for EU MDR. So resourcing, we talked about that, right? You're going to need extra people. You're going to need resources to go after the EU MDR compliance. You're going to spend money and time and such and such. And then if you're trying to close a compliance gap, you're going to most likely try and do retesting, right? And when I say retesting, I'm really imagining state of the product that do require true retesting, right? Products that are been out in the market for a while and probably are high revenue and have a lot of risk, and you need to go after them, right? And those are the costs, and so we have to absorb them, right? And the first thing you jump out and say, okay, let's go ahead and do that. But the part that I'm trying to bring today forward is that before you start going down that path, you have to take a step back and think about the benefits that you can create through the EU MDR compliance upkeep. And there's several. So the ones that I have out here is, okay, well, now you can update your quality system, your procedures, right? You can draw the line in sand and say, okay, from today, my procedures are now going to have all these different other sections and processes tied to it that meet EU MDR compliance and upgrade it, right? So you can really bring them up to speed to what the industry really requires today. The next one is obviously the compliance gap closure, right? So obviously EU MDR is forcing all of us, right? That you have to now comply, you have to do this, right? So that's another benefit. It's a benefit because now you're really bringing, at some point, all your product is going to be compliant to the latest standards. Improve margin. Now we're starting to talk about the opportunity aspects of it, right? So can you do certain things with your product and processes where maybe it's cheaper, more cost effective, you can be a better price competitive advantage in the industry. There's things you can do because if you're touching the legacy product, right, go ahead and make an improvement to it. Maybe that's the opportunity you're looking at. Streamline operations, right? So maybe you can streamline your operations, your assembly, you can consolidate, you can change the way you do things in your operations. And this is your opportunity because you are touching that product now. You have to touch it. So why not benefit from it, right? And very important, and I think this is really the starting point of everything we talk about, is enhanced user experience and safety. So it's likely, or maybe not, that your customers are maybe not experiencing what they should be experiencing with your product. So maybe there's an opportunity you can create to enhance the user experience, to enhance the safety, and really upgrade the way your product is presented to market. So these are all the benefits, right? But the question is like, why bother making these changes? Why not just go retest it? It is so simple. Let's just get it done, right? Why not just take the legacy product, send it through the lab, do the testing, and close the gap? Well, answer is very simple, right? Failing a packaging test on commercial product can potentially result in product recalls. So you fail your commercial product in the market, now you just can't keep it on there because you failed the design that was already on the market. There's potential that if you recall the product, now you're losing market share because your competitors are taking advantage at your loss. And then there's the stigma, the company, the value that the shareholders are looking at, the investors are looking at, right? So there's a lot at stake over here by simply just taking what you have and trying to retest it. So the consideration that needs to be made here is, okay, do I really take a step back and plan things in a way that you can create benefit through the EU MDR?
So Abby, you're talking here about a great deal of complexities in terms of timelines, products, definitely risks, as you well have laid out, but also of all those opportunities all those benefits that you have listed there. How can a packaging department at a medical device manufacturer simplify their approach, just to drive home this simplification aspect of it? How can they do that?
Absolutely. Thank you, Lisa. It's a great question, right? Because yes, this is very complex, right? And the most important part here is that we as a shared service, often under pressure from business, need a compelling way to sell the strategy, to sell the opportunity to business. And I think we have the power to do it. And I'm going to share with you a three-step approach here that I believe can be somewhat very successful in creating that simplification. So let's start with the first step. So the first step really is categorize your products into short-term, medium-term, and long-term. So hypothetically, I threw the timeline and actually stored the visual from the EU MDR, and I turned it aside with it. And you can see the short-term is anything, let's just say hypothetically, due for submission this year. Medium is something that is due, let's say, in next year and a half, and then long-term is in 2.5 years, right? So you take the list of all your products and you segregate it, right? That's the first step. Okay. As you do that, what starts to become obvious is first is the priority. So you can tell the short term is the highest priority and the long term is down in the priority list. But at the same time, look at the x-axis on this. You're seeing this improvement opportunity, right? So anything that's short term has limited improvement opportunity. But anything that is medium and long, and you will have these timelines from your regulatory folks or from your company priority list, you will know which products are due next year, which are due the after. So this should be a very easy exercise. Okay, so that's the first step. Categorize your products. The next one, and I think this is very near and dear to my heart because it talks about risks. Okay, so let me break down this visual for you. On x-axis, we're talking about a likelihood of packaging failure if you were to simply retest what's in the market. On the left side is low, and on the right side it's high. And then on the y-axis, you have revenue impact going from low to high. So revenue impact means the product itself, the equity of it, the revenue that brings in goes from low to high. So it could be tied to volume, it could be tied to the pricing of it, but really x-axis is the failure likelihood, the y-axis is revenue impact. Okay. So you take that and you break down this graph into 4 parts. Anything that's in the bottom left first quadrant is anything that is low revenue maker and has low likelihood for failure. On the top, you have high revenue, low failure. On the bottom right, you have high failure, low revenue. And on the top right, you have high revenue, high failure, right? So first step, again, you break it down in short, medium, and long term, right? Now you take those short, medium, and long term and you break it down into these 4 categories to understand what is the risk we're talking about. You want to quantify that for your company. You want to quantify that for your management to say, okay, here's the ones that are kind of low risk and low revenue, and here's some ones that are high risk, high revenue. And let's talk about it, right? Okay, step 2, done. Where do you go from here? Next step, you organize and strategize. And this to me is where you really bring it all together, right? So this slide is going to get a little busy, but let's go step by step at it. Okay. So you got your short-term products, you got your medium-term, you got your long-term products, right? Now remember this graph from the last slide. I brought it over here, and what I did, I put the 1, 2, 3, and 4, just to keep things a little more visually situated, right? So here you go. What you do is first you focus on your low revenue and low failure products, right? So these are the products that bring in very less money or low side and have a low chance of failing. I think with these products, really, whether it's your short term, medium term, long term, I think you can go retest these products, right? There's 2 reasons. One, they have low chance for failure. Like you're looking at it and saying, okay, well, if I retest it, chance is very limited it's going to fail. Oh, by the way, it's low revenue. I don't have the money to spend on this. I can't justify changing anything about these. So I'm going to go retest these. And these are probably the simpler ones to go after. High revenue, low failure rate, right? Now you're talking products that are bringing you in the top left quadrant, they're bringing you higher revenue, and there's a low chance of failing, right? So arguably, someone can say, well, just go retest it, right? No, but I'm thinking dollar figures, right? I'm talking, okay, even though the chance is low for them to fail, I don't want to risk my revenue. I don't want a big recall. I don't want a big stigma. Shareholders are not going to like it. So for anything short term, retest with minor changes. Anything medium term, look into redesigning some aspects of your packaging, right? And for long term, significant changes. You can open it all up, right? So we're talking about trade-offs earlier. You can open this up. You can say, I got 2.5 years. I can really plan things. I can squeeze cost out. I can streamline things. There's things I can do drastically better to change my product, right? And the reason is simple, folks. We talked about this earlier, is that the reason why you are trying to change or bring the opportunity, is probably a better way to say it, like bring the opportunity in your legacy products, is because this will allow you to really eliminate the risk of any recalls or affecting commercial product. Okay, so the next one is bottom right, low revenue, high failure. Now in this one, you're talking products that make very less money or low side of revenues, but you can fail. Like there's something wrong with the packaging design, or it's not, where it should be. So I will say for these, I would say if it's short term, honestly, you don't have a lot of time left. Either you can look for a way to rationalize, right, or discontinue. That's to me just practical sense.
Abby,
Medium term,
Abby, I'm so sorry. Could you give an example of maybe a product package that was rationalized or discontinued? Obviously discontinued, but what do you mean by rationalized?
yeah. So rationalize really means that you're trying to leverage data. Maybe that's probably a better way to say it. So instead of trying to retest, because again, even though it's low revenue, if you fail, right? If you have a high chance of failing, Lisa, um, you're still talking a recall. You're still talking your name out there in the market and you're reporting a recall, right? And that's what we're trying to avoid here. So you look at the product, right? Say it's a commodity item, right? And I don't want to pick a medical device because I work for a medical device company and there's many other ones out there. But let's say you pick up a commodity item that brings in low revenue for you, right? But the design, let's just say the pouch wasn't designed properly, it's an older material, it can puncture if you send it to the distribution testing, you can fail easily. What I would try to do is try to find ways to maybe leverage test data or data from another similar product maybe that you have on the market, and try not to do retesting on it because you have a chance of failing. Or maybe you just discontinue it. You go to your marketing folks, you go to your GMs and say, look, it doesn't make sense for us to touch this product. It has a high chance of failing. We're talking some big repercussions over here. Let's just discontinue. So that to me is a sounder approach than retesting something which is low revenue and high failure. Does that answer your question, Lisa?
Yes, thank you very much.
Wonderful. So medium term or long term. So over here now I'm saying, okay, if it's low revenue, let's just take an example. If it's low revenue and you can't discontinue, maybe this is an important product for your portfolio. Look for ways to redesign, maybe some simpler redesigns where you can maybe squeeze some cost out of it, or you can make improvements. So I would say between medium and long term, you can look to redesign, and that's probably a way to go if you want to keep the product on market. Obviously, if it's low revenue enough where you just have so much going on and all these complexity, you can still talk to your marketing and GM folks about, okay, do we discontinue this product because it doesn't make sense to fail it, right? And then last but not the least, the most stressful products, the ones that are high revenue, high failure, you're talking a lot of money at stake over here. For these, I will say in short term, absolutely, if you want to retest something, retest with at least some kind of changes so that if you were to fail the product, you're not going to impact your commercial, right? That's one opportunity. Obviously, it all really depends, right? We're talking very hypothetical stuff over here. You have to translate it to your products and your packaging design and what's the possibility. But some level of changes are required because, again, if you fail, there's a lot that can go wrong here, right? Medium term, I would say absolutely. You need to redesign. These are high revenue products, right? We're talking some big margins over here. So maybe improvements that you make can maybe cut costs down, maybe streamline operations, maybe improve your product in terms of user experience and safety, right? So you got to look at that. And then long term, absolutely. I think great candidate for significant changes, right? So taking a step back from this slide and looking at, again, the overall process. So really, in summary, Lisa, if you can take all those complexities, right, break it down into a short-term, medium-term, long-term vision for your product filing. If you can then next level, look at the risk, revenue versus failure, and then use this approach for organizing and strategizing, I think now you are chunking up the risk in different segments and different buckets, and you creating a plan that can now help you create the opportunity we talked about.
And as you said, it may look like a busy slide, but the way it's organized is it really does simplify the processes and the decisions that have to be made. So Abby, let's maybe take a look at one area of improvement at a time. So what tips might you have for redesigning packages that maybe you're looking at enhancing the user's experience and or safety? How about we take a look at that?
Absolutely, Lisa. So we talked about this earlier, right? I was mentioning that when you look at EU MDR, and not even just that, right? Look at the essence of the medical device packaging standards. And what do we do at work day to day, right? We're all about patient, we're all about user, right? So to me, that's always the starting point. In fact, when you look at design control, when you look at how new products are developed, everything starts with the patient, everything starts with the end user. So I believe that when you look at those categories, right, and you have to keep the perspectives that I shared in the past previous slides around, especially the medium term and long term, right, where you can really touch the product and make changes. Those are great opportunities for really to take a step back and say, how can I improve my user experience and safety? And to me, really, it's again a four-pronged approach in my mind. And again, there is no cookie cutter approach over here, but broadly speaking, the first place you really want to start is reviewing a design requirement document, right? So get back to the basics, get back to the blackboard, take a look at the DRDs for your products in market and say, did I capture my user requirements properly? Did I put in enough effort and diligence as a company, as a function, as a BU, looking into did I capture those user experiences properly, and do I have all of that captured? That's the first place to start because you're really going back to the foundational element of your product in the market. The second one is complaint data. So this is another interesting one. We as medical device manufacturers, companies have to do post-market surveillance, have to do complaint data tracking. So it's highly likely you have data available on your product. By no means I'm saying that lack of complaints is a lack of problems. There is that piece of it, but still, your data on your products in the market will tell you something about what your users are experiencing from your designs today. And if you do not have sufficiently any of the first two, then you really have to take time to go back and connect with your marketing folks, your sales folks, with your customers, and get out there, right? And I put VOX because to me, we're talking two different categories of customers. We're talking internal customers, we're talking external customers. So do some voice of customer surveys, really collect the data. Ask them, what do they feel about your product packaging today, both internally and externally, so it can give you some measurable things to look at. And then the last thing is, which is again always ongoing, is any new products that you are getting ready to introduce in the market or are in the pipeline. There's work going on over there where voices from customers are being considered. So when you look at your design requirement documents and you learn from that, when you look at your complaint data, you learn from that, your voice of customer, your NPI pipeline, that to you uh, allow you to now start to redefine maybe some of the target conditions, right? Now, if you have product which is just brilliant, right? You've never had any issues, the design requirements were perfect, there's no complaints, the voices are great, sure, that's great, right? You don't need to redefine anything and redo it. But we're talking about maybe products that are out for 5 years, 10 years, decades, right? This is your opportunity. EU MDR brings you the unique opportunity to redefine those target conditions that can now become part of your redesign, right? So you've got the user conditions, right? And you can translate them into the specs, the design requirements that you should be redesigning to. And now, potentially, you have a renewed user experience and safety through the EU MDR compliance aspects.
Very well explained. Again, Abby, thank you so much. And I know that the focus is mainly on the patient, as well it should be. But let's take a look at what tips you have. I'm really excited to hear what tips you have for redesigning packaging to reduce costs.
Absolutely. So as we go to the next visual, I do want to mention that there's several ways to do this, right? And the engineer inside me wants to create, I don't know how many more slides talking about just the redesign, but I want to create a visual that can be both easy to remember and be impactful, Lisa. And so consider this, right? So on the x-axis, you have the risk and complexity through a redesign, right? So how much risk does a redesign carry? How complex it is, right? And on the y-axis, you have the timing, the time that's going to take you to do the work, and then the cost, right? How much is it going to cost? So going back to the whole short-term, medium-term, long-term, going back to the risk, different buckets, depending on which category you're going after, I think At the times that you're looking for something that's going to be quick, maybe cost effective, low risk, low complexity, you can start focusing on your tertiary packaging. So your shippers, your standardization of shippers, maybe looking at reducing head spaces, reducing dimensions, improving board quality. Um, I would say those type of typically, right? Typically, those type of changes fall into a rather low risk, low complexity, faster, more cost effective type of redesign. Um, if you have a little more time, obviously focus on the next level, then, right? So you can go after shelf cartons, you can go after your protective packaging, do similar things we're talking about. You can look at standardizing the designs. You can look at dimensions. You can look at different types of options of materials, and that to me is next level up on this graph. If you have even more time, and now I'm talking truly tapping into those opportunities, right, that we talked about, whether it's user experience or whether it's margins or it's any other aspects, right? You can now start to look at your store barrier, right? Depending on how much time you have and what leverageability exists, now you're starting to push the bar, both in the risk and complexity and the timing and cost. Now you're looking at some barrier materials that you can upgrade to. And I really think, depending on how ambitious you are and how much you want to tap into the opportunity, you can start looking into new materials, advanced materials. Maybe there's a sense where the materials you're using today are not as advanced as they should be. Maybe you can partner out there with resources that can help you create those new materials. So, to me, this whole redesign, right? First thing is you have to consider, right? That's really the first step, right? We talked about that, the risk, right? Like why you should do it, right? And then as you go through the three-step process, you should be able to pick products from different buckets and then throw them on the screen, right? And be able to say, okay, which one is a great candidate for what? And to me, that is a redesign opportunity that EU MDR brings to you.
Abby, can I ask, looking at this particular chart here, I think to myself that maybe, do you go further back or further up, however you want to phrase it, considering how long it's been since you did the initial design and or redesign, because of the amount of time that's passed, there's more likelihood that newer innovations have come out in the industry? Is that just kind of like a gimme?
Yes, absolutely. I would say, depending on how much time has passed since you launched your product, right? That could be one. Another good example is maybe you acquired a company and they brought products with them, right? Or when you launch something, you grandfather and really, really old product, right? So depending on that, how far you can go, I think the greater the opportunity can become. And that can be both lateral, that can be horizontal, that can be vertical, in many different ways. But definitely, that's a factor over there as well.
Okay, excellent. So we've already talked about the user experience and safety. We've talked about a little bit of costs here. Let's tackle the third area, and that is improving operations in some way. So what tips do you have for that?
Sure, Lisa. Thank you. And I'll tell you, folks who know me in the industry, they know operations is very near and dear to my heart. So again, we're talking about a topic that I can go on for a really long time. But again, I try to keep the visual very simple and similar to what we just talked about, right? So again, x-axis, we're talking low risk, low complexity on the left side, high risk and high complexity on the right side, and timing and cost, same thing on the y-axis. So again, going back to the categorizing, the risk categories, the buckets and such, depending on the appetite you have for that, depending where you want to go, you can look at simply streamlining your operations. Maybe you want to change the assembly layout. Maybe you want to squeeze out timing, the tag time from your operations, your use cells and such. Maybe you want to change the way your things are organized, how the product flows, how the raw material flows. So simpler changes can still help you over here establish a good opportunity. Further up is revalidate, right? So if you have time and you can do this, I will say a good way, a somewhat low risk way, is to maybe looking at your historical process development and design of experience, and maybe changing your parameters, right? And changing your seal settings and revalidating your packages, right? So you're not changing anything about them, you're simply revalidating them to a different parameter, changing them enough that if you have to test them, you're not testing what's in the market, right? So there's those, I think, subtle ways to make those changes through revalidation. I would say you can keep going, right? So you can standardize, right? You can standardize between product lines. You can standardize within a product line. You could standardize your test methods, and maybe you can upgrade your test method validations, right? You can do that, and you have a brand new process now. You can standardize equipment, right? You can standardize maybe a type of sealer that you buy. So you're not really starting to push, right? And your volume of the change, right? The degree of it is getting bigger and bigger, right? As you're going up towards the right. And then I think the next one is a new technology, right? You can bring in a new technology. Maybe today you are batch processing a product, and now you can go to a single piece flow, and you can bring in a brand new equipment instead of a brand new line. You've got state-of-art technology. You've got extremely good cost on it. You've got great margins, and you can change a lot about how your operations, right? So I will say, really, again, the sky is the limit. Like, how ambitious are you? What does your company allow you to do? But again, if you go back and take a look at what we were talking about previously, from risk bucket standpoint, from priority standpoint, you can literally take those products and throw them into one of these buckets and say, okay, this product is a great candidate for that activity, and that becomes your operations opportunity to the EU MDR compliance.
You're right. This topic alone could be a session in itself, being able to dive into a lot of the details of that. I also am have an affiliation for packaging operations, so I can see your attraction to this. Well, you're living up to your reputation of being able to simplify very complex thoughts and processes. Abby, what final thoughts might you have as we conclude this conversation today?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And again, I want to thank you and everyone who's here to participate in this conversation today. Is, you know, for me, there's several conclusions, and several thoughts I want to share with you. Some of them might be, I don't know, thought provoking, or for you to just really go back and reflect. But the first one is obvious, right? I'm clearly sharing my personal thought that really upgrading compliance, and not just EU MDR compliance, I think upgrading compliance is not a challenge. So whether we like it or not, whether it's a difficult thing to deal with, it's an opportunity. You really can create an opportunity out of it, and that's how you need to take a look at it. So to me, that's beginning to end is a message all along. Several other things I want to share. So I will say, if you are a packaging department, you are a shared function, you're working with multiple customers end to end, you've got all this going on. I will say one thing that has worked beautifully for me in my career in general is a single point of accountability. And to me, if you are running an MDR program, you really want a single point of contact that represents your MDR end-to-end program for your packaging, who can project manage, who can communicate, who can be that. Because as you can see, timing is moving by fast, right? Months are going by, this year is going to go by, in 3 years, gosh, we're going to be in the market with full MDR compliant products. So you need single point of accountability. And I think that is very important. The next one, and this is a very interesting subject, so people talk about this, right? Resourcing, internal versus external. And to me, it all depends, right? So if you are looking at deploying organic talent, you need that internal knowledge, and you really don't have time to go out there and establish a learning curve with external resources. I think internal is visible, right? So that's for sure. Now, for external, I think obviously this is a great advantage, right? If you do not have the resources, if you have the funds to get external resources, you maybe don't even have the learning, you don't have the structure. I think absolutely. I think going external would be very beneficial. So upfront, considering whether you want to say internal or external from resourcing standpoint is a very important fact to consider. Project management is the key. We know it. This is very complex. We talked about this. There's a lot of product. There's a lot of going on, and you really need to have a good project management deployment on this. Great. You have to track your timelines properly. You have to communicate in an effective way. You have to manage your risks, and right along that, I think you need to have a regular risk review. So when you think about some of the risks we were talking about earlier, let's just say you actually go through the exercise of phasing the products and recognizing the risk and creating the buckets. You need to have a regular risk review. And when you actually come across situations where you feel there's high risk, you need to make the effort to get in front of your business units with your customers to say, okay, here's the situation we found, and here's the repercussions, here's 3 ideas. And that will do 2 things. One, it will keep you ahead of any challenges that you can foresee with legacy products, but it also means instant credibility. You are actually helping the business units, your customers, in making sure they are staying ahead of any revenue risk, right? And then the last piece, and we always start with this, we always end with this, and the last point I want to make is ISO 11607 compliance is paramount. You cannot bypass that. You cannot do things differently. That is still there. EU MDR is part of it. It's together, and you have to consider that. So with that, Lisa, I want to just conclude this presentation today. Again, I want to thank you the opportunity and everyone else participating today in this discussion. And I want to wish everyone all the best for the EU MDR compliance.
Thank you so much, Abby. Fantastic job on the presentation. And we'll be coming back to you for more of your expertise in the future, I'm sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.